They stabbed her in the chest with a rusted blade, thinking a single strike would end the quiet woman who'd been asking too many questions around the docks. Blood soaked through her jacket as she stumbled backward, gasping, her hand pressed against the wound. The three men laughed, wiping their hands clean, already planning how to dump her body in the murky waters of Crimson Bay. What they didn't know was that the woman bleeding out in front of them had survived worse in Fallujah, and she wasn't done fighting. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But before we show you the exact moment Lieutenant Commander Jade Reeves turned a life-threatening attack into the most decisive counter-operation these criminals had ever witnessed, and the words she spoke that made grown men beg for mercy, drop a comment telling us which country you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button with the bell notification on, because what happened next will redefine everything you think you know about survival, training, and what happens when you corner someone who's been taught to never give up. The fog rolled thick off Crimson Bay that October evening, swallowing the industrial waterfront in a gray blanket that muffled sound and hid secrets. Down here, where legitimate shipping operations ended and questionable cargo transfers began, the air tasted of salt, diesel fuel, and something darker that decent people preferred not to identify. Shipping containers stacked like metal mountains cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt, creating a maze where conversations happened in whispers and handshakes sealed deals that would never see daylight. Lieutenant Commander Jade Reeves stepped off the passenger ferry with the kind of purposeful stride that belonged to someone who knew exactly where she was going, even when she didn't. Her civilian clothes, dark jeans, worn leather jacket, plain baseball cap pulled low, marked her as just another face in the steady stream of dock workers, truckers, and questionable characters who moved through this part of the harbor after sunset. No military bearing, no obvious weapons, nothing to suggest she was anything more than someone with business to conduct in the shadows, behind the wheel of a rusted pickup truck parked near Warehouse 7. Dmitry Kozlov watched her through his side mirror. 37 years old, built like a man who'd learned to fight in prison yards rather than training rings, with scars across his knuckles that told stories he never shared with strangers. "That her?" he muttered into the radio clipped to his collar. "Affirmative," came the crackling reply. "Target confirmed. Civilian contractor, some kind of federal auditor. Been asking questions about the midnight shipments all week." Kozlov snorted. Another bureaucrat with a clipboard and a badge, thinking she could waltz into their operation and play investigator. In his 15 years running cargo operations for the Volkov Syndicate, he'd dealt with plenty of government types who thought they were untouchable. Most of them learned quickly that federal badges didn't stop bullets, and audit reports didn't matter much when you were floating face down in the harbor. "She's alone," observed his passenger, Tommy the Knife Benedetto, a wiry man whose nickname came from his preferred method of settling disagreements. His fingers drummed nervously against the door handle, the kind of restless energy that came from too much methamphetamine and not enough sleep. "No backup, no visible wire. Looks like easy work." From the passenger seat of a second vehicle parked 40 yards away, Luis Vasquez adjusted his night vision scope and tracked Jade's movement between the containers. Former military himself, dishonorably discharged from the Marines after an incident in Afghanistan involving missing supply shipments, he recognized something in the way she moved that made him pause. "She walks like she's been downrange," he said quietly. "So what?" Kozlov replied. "Half the people down here claim they're ex-military. Doesn't mean they can handle real pressure." But Vasquez kept watching. There was something about her posture, the way she checked her surroundings without appearing to look, the manner in which she positioned herself with clear sightlines and multiple exit routes. Professional habits died hard, and this woman had them in spades. "I'm telling you, boss, She's not what she seems. Kozlov wasn't interested in analysis. The Volkov syndicate had been moving illegal weapons through Crimson Bay for 3 years without interference. And they weren't about to let some federal pencil pusher disrupt an operation that generated $8 million annually. The instructions from Moscow had been clear. Eliminate the threat, make it look like a robbery gone wrong, and get back to business. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Target is approaching Warehouse 12, Vasquez reported. Moving alone, no communication equipment visible. Perfect, Kozlov said, checking his weapon. Tommy, you take point. Luis, cover the back exit. I'll handle the interrogation. What none of them knew was that Lieutenant Commander Jade Reeves wasn't a federal auditor. She wasn't even supposed to be in Crimson Bay. 3 weeks earlier, her younger sister Sarah, a genuine federal investigator, had disappeared while investigating this same smuggling operation. The official report listed her as missing, presumed dead, case transferred to local jurisdiction where it promptly stalled in bureaucratic limbo. But Jade didn't believe in bureaucratic limbo. She believed in direct action, in following leads until they led somewhere, and in the kind of justice that couldn't be filed away in manila folders. So she'd taken leave from her classified assignment with Naval Special Warfare Group 4, assumed her sister's identity, and come to Crimson Bay to find answers. The blade hit her just above the 4th rib, angled upward, designed to puncture the lung and cause rapid blood loss. Tommy Benedetto had done this before, quick, efficient, usually fatal within minutes. But as Jade stumbled backward, her hand instinctively covering the wound, her mind was already running calculations. Entry angle suggested a right-handed attacker. Approximately 5'8", blade length 4 to 6 inches. Probable puncture of the lower lung but no major arterial damage. More importantly, she was still conscious, still mobile. And these 3 idiots had just graduated from smuggling charges to attempted murder of a federal officer. The game had changed completely, and they had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Now, what happens when you stab someone who's been trained to fight through injuries that would incapacitate most people? Someone who survived firefights in 3 different countries and considers a punctured lung just another tactical challenge to overcome. You're about to find out, and trust me, you won't believe how this story ends. The morning sun cut through the industrial haze of Crimson Bay like a searchlight, casting harsh shadows between the towering shipping containers that lined Pier 19. The harbor buzzed with its usual symphony of diesel engines, hydraulic lifts, and shouted orders in half a dozen languages. Legitimate cargo moved alongside questionable shipments, and everyone involved understood the unspoken rule: see nothing, hear nothing, ask nothing. Lieutenant Commander Jade Reeves had arrived on the 0600 freight barge from Port Angeles, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder, a worn leather portfolio clutched in her left hand. To anyone watching, she looked exactly like what her forged credentials claimed. Sarah Reeves, Federal Compliance Auditor, Department of Commerce, here to conduct a routine inspection of import documentation and warehouse storage protocols. Her appearance had been carefully crafted for invisibility. Sensible gray slacks, white button-down shirt, navy blazer that hung loose enough to conceal the tactical vest underneath. Wire-rimmed glasses that she didn't need. Auburn hair pulled back in a utilitarian ponytail. Minimal makeup that made her look tired and overworked. The kind of bureaucrat that dock workers ignored and warehouse supervisors tolerated with barely concealed irritation. She carried herself with the slouched posture of someone who spent too much time hunched over paperwork. Her stride measured but unremarkable. No military bearing, no obvious awareness of tactical positioning. Nothing to suggest she was anything more than another federal inspector, armed with clipboards and compliance Checklists dot from behind the tinted windows of the harbor master's office. Port Authority Supervisor Rick Castellanos watched her approach with mild curiosity. 26 years he'd been managing operations at Crimson Bay, and he'd seen every type of federal investigator the government could throw at them. ATF agents trying to track weapons shipments, D looking for drug routes, Coast Guard conducting safety inspections, customs officials chasing import violations. Most of them announced their arrival with badges and attitudes. This one had simply shown up. Another Fed, he muttered to his assistant Linda Chen, who was sorting through the morning's manifest reports. Commerce Department this time. Probably checking if we're storing hazardous materials next to the food shipments again. Linda glanced out the window. She looks harmless enough. Think she's here about the Kozlov operation? Castellanos shrugged. Kozlov pays his dock fees on time and keeps his paperwork clean. Far as we're concerned, his cargo is exactly what it says on the manifest. He'd learned long ago that curiosity was a luxury port supervisors couldn't afford, especially when dealing with operations that generated the kind of revenue that kept Crimson Bay profitable. Down on the pier, longshoreman foreman Bobby, Tank Morrison was briefing his morning crew when he spotted the woman with the portfolio walking purposefully toward Warehouse District 7. Tank had been moving cargo for 15 years, and he'd developed an instinct for people who didn't belong. This one triggered every alarm bell he had. "Hey, Carmine," he called to one of his crane operators. "You see the Fed?" Carmen Russo lowered his coffee mug and followed Tank's gaze. "Yeah, spotted her getting off the barge. Walked right past the security checkpoint like she owned the place. No escort, no advance notice. Just another suit with a clipboard." "Something feels off," Tank said, adjusting his hard hat. Real Feds usually travel in pairs. They announce themselves, flash badges, make a production out of being here. This one's too quiet. But even as he spoke, Tank noticed details that didn't quite fit the bureaucrat image. The way she checked her surroundings without appearing to look around. How she positioned herself with clear sight lines and multiple exit routes as she walked. The fact that her left hand never strayed far from her jacket pocket, where something small and rectangular created a barely visible outline. Most telling was her reaction when a forklift backfired nearby. Instead of startling like a typical civilian, she turned toward the sound with controlled precision, her body shifting into a stance that suggested training. Not the kind of training they gave Commerce Department auditors near Warehouse 12, where the Kozlov Syndicate stored their most sensitive cargo. Security guard Miguel Santos was conducting his routine perimeter check when he noticed the woman approaching with her portfolio. Santos was former Army, 2 tours in Iraq, and he recognized something familiar in the way she moved that made him pause his rounds. "Control, this is Santos," he said into his radio. "Got a federal inspector approaching Warehouse 12. Something about her doesn't sit right." The voice that crackled back belonged to Shift Supervisor Elena Kowalski, a tough woman who'd run security for the Volkov organization for 8 years. Description? Mid-30s, auburn hair, gray suit, carrying federal ID. Claims she's here for a compliance audit. Santos paused, watching as the woman stopped near a stack of containers and appeared to be reviewing paperwork. "But she moves like someone with combat experience." "Interesting," Elena replied. "Keep visual contact. Don't engage unless she tries to access restricted areas." What none of them realized was that Jade had been conducting surveillance of their operation for 3 days before officially arriving. Using techniques learned during classified assignments in Somalia and Syria, she'd mapped guard rotations, identified security cameras, located vehicle access points, and documented the movement patterns of key personnel. The woman they were watching wasn't conducting a random audit. She was gathering intelligence on the people responsible for her sister's disappearance. And every casual glance, every seemingly innocent question, Every moment spent reviewing routine paperwork was actually reconnaissance for an operation that would begin the moment she had enough evidence to act. As she approached the main office of Warehouse District 7, portfolio in hand and federal credentials prominently displayed, Jade allowed herself a slight smile. They saw exactly what she wanted them to see. Another harmless bureaucrat with a clipboard and a compliance checklist. They had no idea they were being hunted. The morning briefing in Warehouse 7's break room carried the usual mix of coffee steam and cigarette smoke, creating a hazy atmosphere where dock workers gathered before their shifts. Dmitry Kozlov sat at the far table, his scarred hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup, listening to his crew discuss the federal inspector who'd been making rounds since dawn. "She's been at it for 3 hours," reported Carlos Mendez, a crane operator who'd been watching from his elevated position. "Started with the manifest logs, moved to the storage certification documents. Now she's photographing container serial numbers. Real thorough, like she's building a case." Tommy Benedetto snorted, flicking ash from his cigarette. "Feds are all the same. They show up, wave their badges around, ask stupid questions about paperwork nobody cares about, then disappear for 6 months. Meanwhile, we keep moving cargo and making money." "This one's different," insisted Luis Vasquez from his position near the window. His military background made him more observant than the others, and something about the inspector bothered him. "She's not asking the usual questions about safety protocols or import documentation. She's focused on shipping schedules, cargo manifest inconsistencies, and payment processing procedures." Kozlov looked up from his coffee. "What kind of questions?" "Specific ones. Like why container block C-47 shows different weight specifications on the dock receipt versus the customs declaration. Why certain shipments arrive on Tuesday nights but don't show up in the Port Authority logs until Thursday mornings. Why some cargo gets transferred directly to trucks without warehouse storage." The room fell silent. Those were exactly the kinds of details that legitimate auditors usually overlooked. The small discrepancies that kept illegal operations invisible within the larger flow of legitimate commerce. Someone asking those questions either knew exactly what they were looking for or had done serious homework before arriving. "Maybe she's just good at her job," suggested Miguel Santos, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it himself. "Or maybe she's not who she claims to be," Vasquez replied. "I've been watching her for 2 hours. She moves like someone with tactical training. Checks her 6 every 30 seconds, positions herself with clear exit routes, never turns her back to open spaces. That's not auditor behavior." From behind the counter, Elena Kowalski had been listening while pretending to organize inventory sheets. As security supervisor, she'd dealt with her share of federal investigators, and most of them fell into predictable patterns. They arrived with backup, announced their presence loudly, demanded immediate access to restricted areas, and generally made their authority known from the moment they stepped onto the dock. This inspector had been different from the start. Polite but not deferential, thorough but not invasive, professional without being intimidating. She'd shown her credentials when asked, provided proper documentation for her audit authority, and followed all established protocols for federal inspectors. On paper, everything checked out perfectly, too perfectly, in Elena's opinion. "Has anyone run her credentials?" she asked, setting down her clipboard. "Standard verification through the Port Authority office," Santos replied. "Sarah Reeves, Department of Commerce, Compliance Division. Badge number checks out, authorization codes are valid. Supervisor contact information confirms her assignment to Crimson Bay. Everything looks legitimate." "Then why does she feel like a threat?" Kozlov asked, voicing what everyone in the room was thinking. Vasquez stubbed out his cigarette and moved closer to the group. "Because legitimate auditors don't memorize guard rotation schedules. They don't notice which cameras have blind spots. And they sure as hell don't carry themselves like they've been in combat zones. Elena nodded slowly. I ran background checks on federal auditors who visited the port in the last 5 years. Most of them are career bureaucrats with accounting degrees and zero field experience. This woman has situational awareness that comes from training, not textbooks. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Rico Martinez, a forklift operator who'd been working the morning shift in Container Block C. She's asking about the midnight shipments, he announced without preamble. Wants to know why certain containers get moved after hours, who authorizes the transfers, where the paperwork gets filed. A chill settled over the room. The midnight shipments were the heart of the Volkov operation, weapons transfers from Russian suppliers to domestic buyers, carefully disguised as legitimate machinery imports. The timing, routes, and documentation for those shipments were compartmentalized information known only to senior crew members. What did you tell her? Kozlov asked, his voice carrying a warning edge. Nothing specific. Said I work days, don't know about night operations, referred her to the shift supervisor. Rico paused, glancing around the room nervously. But she didn't seem surprised. Like she already knew the answer and was just testing what I'd say. Elena stood up, her mind racing through possibilities. She's been here for 3 hours and she's already identified our most sensitive operational details. Either she's the most competent auditor the Commerce Department has ever produced, or she's running an intelligence operation. Intelligence for who? Tommy asked. FBI? ATF? Customs? Doesn't matter, Kozlov replied, crushing his empty coffee cup. What matters is that she knows too much. If she files a report recommending a full federal investigation, our operation is finished. The weight of that statement settled over the group. The Crimson Bay operation generated $8 million annually for the Volkov syndicate. It employed 40 people, from dock workers to truck drivers to administrative staff. More importantly, it was the primary weapons supply route for 6 different criminal organizations along the West Coast. Losing it would be catastrophic. So what do we do? Santos asked. Elena moved to the window and looked out at the inspector, who was now examining shipping labels with the kind of methodical precision that suggested extensive training. We find out who she really is and what she wants. If she's legitimate, we let her finish her audit and file whatever report makes her happy. If she's not, she didn't finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood the implications. Vasquez pulled out his phone and began scrolling through contacts. I've got sources at 3 different federal agencies. Give me an hour and I can tell you everything about Sarah Reeves, where she went to school, where she worked before Commerce, where she lives, what kind of car she drives. Do it, Kozlov ordered. But quietly. If she really is federal, we don't want to trigger an official investigation by asking too many questions. As the meeting dispersed, Elena remained at the window, watching the woman who'd managed to disrupt their carefully maintained routine in less than half a day. Something about the inspector's methodical approach reminded her of military intelligence operations she'd witnessed during her own service in Afghanistan. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a compliance audit. This was reconnaissance. The afternoon heat had settled over Crimson Bay like a suffocating blanket, turning the metal shipping containers into ovens and making every breath taste of diesel fumes and salt. Jade had been conducting her audit for 6 hours now, and the initial politeness from dock workers was beginning to wear thin. She could feel the shift in atmosphere, the way conversations stopped when she approached. The increased frequency of radio chatter among security personnel. Perfect. Pressure created mistakes. And mistakes revealed truth. She was examining a manifest discrepancy near Container Block D when Dmitry Kozlov finally made his approach. She'd been expecting it. The man had been watching her for the past hour, positioning himself closer each time she moved to a new location. Now he stood about 10 feet away, ostensibly checking inventory numbers on his clipboard while stealing glances in her direction. "Excuse me, miss," he called out, his accent thick but his English precise. "I am shift supervisor for this section. Is there something specific you are looking for?" Jade looked up from her paperwork with the practiced expression of mild, bureaucratic irritation she'd been cultivating all morning. "Sarah Reeves, Commerce Department," she said, offering her credentials. "I'm conducting a routine compliance audit of import documentation and storage procedures. Nothing out of the ordinary." Kozlov examined her badge carefully, taking longer than necessary. She noted his calloused hands, the scar tissue across his knuckles, the way his eyes moved systematically across her face as if memorizing details. This wasn't casual curiosity, this was assessment. "Of course," he said finally, handing back her credentials. "We always cooperate with federal inspectors. Is there anything we can do to help speed up your process?" The question carried subtle pressure. Most legitimate auditors would appreciate offers of assistance, would welcome anything that made their job easier. But Jade recognized the real message: finish quickly and leave. "Actually, yes," she replied, pulling out her tablet. "I'm having difficulty reconciling some shipping manifests with your warehouse intake logs. Specifically, I'm seeing cargo weights that don't match between the customs declarations and your internal documentation." She watched Kozlov's reaction carefully. A slight tightening around his eyes, barely perceptible, but telling. "Which containers specifically?" "Well, for example, container C-47 shows a declared weight of 8,400 kilograms on the customs form, but your dock receipt lists 12,600 kilograms. That's a significant discrepancy." Kozlov's expression didn't change, but she noticed his grip tighten on his clipboard. "Sometimes there are measurement errors. Different scales, different operators. We follow the customs documentation for official purposes." "Of course," Jade nodded, making notes on her tablet. "But the interesting thing is, this same type of discrepancy appears on 17 different containers over the past 3 months. Always the same pattern. Customs weight significantly lower than dock weight. Always on containers that arrive on Tuesday evenings." The silence stretched for several seconds. Kozlov seemed to be processing not just her words, but the implications of how much she'd already discovered. When he spoke, his voice carried a new edge. "You have been very thorough in your research, Miss Reeves. Most auditors focus on current shipments, not historical data." "I believe in being comprehensive," she replied. "The Commerce Department takes import documentation very seriously. Inaccurate weight declarations can indicate customs fraud, which falls under federal jurisdiction." Another warning shot, delivered with bureaucratic politeness. She was letting him know that her investigation could escalate beyond a simple audit if she found sufficient irregularities. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office," Kozlov suggested. "I can provide additional documentation that might explain these discrepancies." Jade pretended to consider the offer while actually assessing the tactical situation. Kozlov's office was located in the administrative section of Warehouse 7, isolated from the main dock area, with limited visibility and multiple blind spots. Classic location for an interrogation or worse. "That's very kind of you, but I prefer to examine documentation in context," she said. "It's easier to understand shipping procedures when you can see the actual cargo handling process." Kozlov's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She was refusing to be isolated, insisting on staying in public areas where her disappearance would be noticed. Either she was an exceptionally cautious auditor, or she understood exactly what kind of danger she was walking into. "Of course," he replied. "Then perhaps you would be interested in observing our evening shift procedures? Many of our specialized cargo transfers occur after normal business hours, when there's less dock traffic." The invitation was delivered with perfect professional courtesy, but Jade recognized it for what it was, a test. Was she brave enough or foolish enough to investigate the midnight operations that represented the heart of their illegal activities? That sounds very educational, she said, checking her watch. What time does the evening shift begin? 2,100 hours. But I should warn you, night operations can be unpredictable. We work with some very specialized cargo that requires careful handling. Another warning, less subtle this time. Jade nodded seriously. I appreciate your concern for my safety. I'll make sure to follow all security protocols. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Luis Vasquez, who had been monitoring their exchange from across the container yard. His military bearing was more obvious now, the kind of controlled tension that came from recognizing a potential threat. Problem here, Dmitri? He asked, his eyes fixed on Jade. No problem, Kozlov replied. Miss Reeves is conducting a federal audit. I was just explaining our evening shift procedures. Vasquez studied Jade with the intensity of someone trained in threat assessment. She met his gaze steadily, maintaining her bureaucratic facade, while noting the way he positioned himself to block her most direct route back to the main dock area. You're very dedicated to your work. Miss Reeves, Vasquez said. Most auditors wrap up by mid-afternoon, file their reports from comfortable offices. You've been here since dawn. Thoroughness is important in my profession, she replied. The American people deserve to know that federal import regulations are being followed properly. She delivered the line with exactly the right amount of bureaucratic self-importance. The kind of attitude that made career civil servants insufferable, but also predictable. Yet she noticed that neither man seemed entirely convinced by her performance. Well, Kozlov said finally, we'll see you at 2,100 hours then. Make sure to wear appropriate safety equipment. Steel-toed boots, hard hat, reflective vest. Night operations can be dangerous for the unprepared. As the two men walked away, Jade continued her examination of shipping documents, but her attention was focused on their conversation, which she could hear clearly across the 20 feet of concrete between them. She knows too much, Vasquez was saying. The weight discrepancies, the Tuesday night pattern, the specific container numbers. That's not random auditing, that's targeted investigation. I agree, Kozlov replied. But we need to be careful. If she really is federal, eliminating her will bring more attention than we can handle. And if she's not federal, then tonight we find out what she really wants. Jade smiled grimly as she made notes on her tablet. They thought they were setting a trap for her. They had no idea that she'd been hoping for exactly this invitation since the moment she'd arrived at Crimson Bay. Finally, she was going to get close enough to the operation to find out what had happened to her sister. The evening shift at Crimson Bay began like clockwork at 2,100 hours, but the atmosphere felt different from the daytime operations. Fewer workers, dimmer lighting, and a tension that seemed to permeate every conversation. Jade arrived at the designated meeting point wearing the required safety equipment, steel-toed boots, hard hat, reflective vest, looking every inch the dedicated federal auditor who took her job seriously. Dmitri Kozlov was waiting for her near the entrance to Warehouse 7, flanked by Luis Vasquez and a third man she hadn't seen before. Tall, lean, with the kind of watchful eyes that never seemed to blink. He introduced himself simply as Anton, without offering a last name or job title. Miss Reeves, Kozlov greeted her with professional courtesy that didn't reach his eyes. Thank you for joining us. Night operations are quite different from our daytime procedures. I think you'll find them ... illuminating. The choice of words felt deliberate, loaded with meaning she wasn't supposed to understand yet. Jade nodded enthusiastically, playing the role of an eager bureaucrat, excited to expand her knowledge of port operations. I appreciate the opportunity to observe your complete operational cycle, she replied, adjusting her hard hat. Comprehensive auditing requires understanding all aspects of cargo handling, not just the documentation. As they walked deeper into the warehouse district, Jade noticed the subtle changes in security posture. Guards who had been casual and relaxed during the day now moved with purpose, communicating through hand signals rather than radio chatter. Surveillance cameras that had seemed randomly positioned were actually creating overlapping fields of coverage with minimal blind spots. This wasn't routine cargo handling. This was a military-style operation disguised as commercial shipping. Our evening procedures focus on specialized cargo, Vasquez explained as they approached Container Block F, an area that had been off-limits during her daytime audit. High-value items that require additional security protocols and careful environmental controls. What type of cargo? Jade asked, pulling out her tablet to take notes. Industrial machinery, mostly, Anton replied, his accent suggesting Eastern European origins. Precision equipment that's sensitive to temperature fluctuations and vibration. Easier to move it when there's less dock traffic. They stopped in front of a shipping container, bearing Cyrillic markings and a manifest label that listed the contents as agricultural. Processing equipment minus 8,400 kilograms. The same container designation she'd questioned Kozlov about earlier. C-47, would you like to examine the documentation? Kozlov asked, producing a folder thick with customs forms, shipping manifests, and inspection certificates. Jade accepted the folder and began reviewing the paperwork with the methodical attention to detail that had characterized her audit all day. Everything appeared legitimate on the surface. Proper import stamps, accurate container numbers, authorized signatures from customs officials. But as she compared the documentation to her earlier notes, the discrepancies became more obvious. The customs weight of 8,400 kilograms didn't match the dock receipt weight of 12,600 kilograms. The declared contents of agricultural processing equipment didn't align with the environmental controls Vasquez had mentioned for precision machinery. More telling was the shipping route. According to the manifest, container C-47 had originated in Hamburg, Germany, made a routine commercial transit across the Atlantic, and arrived at Crimson Bay as part of a standard cargo shipment. But Jade's research had revealed that the vessel listed as the carrier had actually been docked in Murmansk, Russia, during the supposed departure date from Hamburg. This is very interesting documentation, she said carefully, looking up from the folder. But I'm seeing some inconsistencies that might require additional verification. The three men exchanged glances that lasted a fraction of a second too long. Anton moved slightly to his left, positioning himself between Jade and the most direct route back to the main dock area. Vasquez shifted his weight forward, the subtle preparation of someone getting ready to move quickly. What kind of inconsistencies? Kozlov asked, his tone still professionally neutral, but with an underlying edge. Well, for starters, the shipping route doesn't match the vessel's actual location during the departure window. The carrier was in Russian waters when this manifest claims it was loading cargo in Germany. The silence that followed her statement seemed to stretch for minutes rather than seconds. Jade continued reviewing the paperwork, maintaining her bureaucratic focus while using her peripheral vision to monitor all three men's positions and reactions. Perhaps there was an error in the vessel tracking data, Anton suggested. Commercial shipping routes can be complex, with multiple stops and cargo transfers. That's possible, Jade agreed, making notes on her tablet. But when combined with the weight discrepancies and the environmental control requirements you mentioned, it suggests this cargo might not be what it appears to be. She delivered the observation with the clinical detachment of someone identifying accounting errors, rather than uncovering criminal activity. But the effect on her escorts was immediate and unmistakable. Kozlov's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket pocket. Vasquez's breathing changed, becoming more controlled and deliberate. Anton took another step to his left, now completely blocking her retreat route. "Miss Reeves," Kozlov said slowly, You seem to be very knowledgeable about shipping procedures for a Commerce Department auditor. Most federal inspectors focus on documentation compliance rather than investigative analysis. The statement was both a compliment and an accusation. Jade looked up from her tablet with an expression of mild confusion, as if she didn't understand the implications of his words. "I take my job seriously," she replied. "American taxpayers deserve thorough oversight of import operations, especially when irregularities suggest potential customs violations." "Of course," Vasquez interjected. "But sometimes irregularities have innocent explanations. Perhaps we should discuss this in a more private setting where we can review additional documentation." Another attempt to isolate her, this time without the pretense of professional courtesy. Jade glanced around the container yard, noting the absence of other workers in their immediate vicinity. The nearest occupied area was at least 200 yards away, well beyond shouting distance. "Actually, I think I have enough information for tonight," she said, closing the folder and handing it back to Kozlov. "I'll need to verify some of these details with my office before proceeding further." "I'm afraid that might not be possible," Anton said, abandoning all pretense of helpful cooperation. "You see, Miss Reeves, we've done some research of our own since this afternoon." Jade felt her pulse quicken, but she maintained her bureaucratic facade. "I'm not sure I understand." "Your credentials check out perfectly," Vasquez continued. "Sarah Reeves, Commerce Department, Compliance Division. Excellent educational background, outstanding performance reviews, authorized for this audit assignment." He paused, letting the tension build. "The problem is, the real Sarah Reeves has been missing for 3 weeks. Her apartment was found empty, her car abandoned at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Her credit cards unused since October 15th. The words hit Jade like a physical blow. Even though she'd been expecting this moment since she first decided to assume her sister's identity. Her careful preparation, her months of studying Sarah's work patterns and professional relationships, her detailed knowledge of Commerce Department procedures, none of it mattered now. They knew she wasn't who she claimed to be. "So the question becomes," Kozlov said, pulling his hands out of his jacket pockets to reveal a compact pistol. "Who are you really? And what happened to the real Sarah Reeves?" Jade looked at the 3 men surrounding her, at the weapon pointed in her direction, at the isolated location far from any potential help. For the first time since arriving at Crimson Bay, she allowed her bureaucratic mask to slip slightly. "I think," she said quietly, "we need to have a very different conversation." The pistol in Kozlov's hand remained steady, but Jade could see the calculation in his eyes. 3 armed men, 1 isolated woman, no witnesses within shouting distance. The tactical advantage seemed overwhelming. What they didn't realize was that she'd been maneuvering them toward this exact scenario since the moment she'd arrived at Crimson Bay. "Let's start with something simple," Vasquez said, circling to her right while Anton maintained position on her left. "What's your real name?" Jade raised her hands slowly, the gesture of someone recognizing they'd been caught. But her mind was already running through combat scenarios, calculating distances, identifying improvised weapons, mapping escape routes. The shipping container behind her provided cover, but also limited mobility. The nearest forklift was 30 feet away, too far to reach before they could react. "My name is Jade Reeves," she said, allowing a tremor to enter her voice. "Sarah was my sister." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Kozlov's expression shifted from suspicious to predatory. "Was? She came here 3 weeks ago investigating your operation. She never came home." Jade's voice carried the kind of grief that couldn't be faked, the raw edge of someone who'd lost family and wanted answers. "I came to find out what happened to her." Anton laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "So you decided to play federal agent? Very foolish. Very dangerous." "I needed to know the truth," Jade replied. letting desperation bleed into her tone. The official investigation went nowhere. Local police said she probably ran away. Federal authorities claimed they had no evidence of foul play. But I knew Sarah, she would never just disappear. Vasquez moved closer, his own weapon now visible. And what did you think you would accomplish here? One woman against our entire operation. I thought I could find evidence. Something to prove what really happened. She gestured toward her tablet with shaking hands. I've been documenting everything, the weight discrepancies, the shipping irregularities, the midnight operations. I was going to turn it all over to the FBI. Kozlov studied her face intently, looking for signs of deception. You're telling us you're not law enforcement? Not military? Just a grieving sister playing detective? I work in insurance, Jade said, the lie rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. Claims investigation for a company in Portland. Sarah always said I was good at finding details other people missed. The three men exchanged glances, and she could see them reassessing the threat level. A trained federal agent was dangerous and would be missed quickly. A military operator represented an even greater risk. But a civilian insurance investigator with no backup and no official authority? That was manageable. What did you do with the real audit authorization? Anton asked. I found Sarah's apartment before the police sealed it. She'd been working on this investigation for months, had copies of all the documentation she'd submitted to get approval for the audit. I just borrowed her identity. It was close enough to the truth to be believable. Jade had indeed found extensive files in her sister's apartment, evidence that Sarah had been building a comprehensive case against the Volkov operation before her disappearance. What they didn't know was that Jade had also found encrypted communications suggesting Sarah had been working with federal authorities as an informant. Very resourceful, Kozlov said. But also very stupid. Did you really think you could just walk in here, ask some questions, and walk away with evidence of a multi-million-dollar operation? I thought if I acted like an official auditor, you'd show me enough to understand what happened to Sarah. Jade let tears form in her eyes, not difficult given the genuine grief she carried. I needed to know if she suffered. If you hurt her before. She didn't finish the sentence, allowing the implication to hang in the air. Three dangerous men confronted by a desperate woman seeking closure for her murdered sister. It was exactly the kind of scenario that made criminals careless. Your sister was very persistent, Vasquez said, his tone carrying a note of admiration. She kept coming back, asking better questions each time. We warned her to stay away, but she wouldn't listen. What did you do to her? The question came out as a whisper, but Jade could see the impact on all three men. They'd crossed a line with Sarah, and the memory of it still affected them. We tried to scare her off first, Anton admitted. Broke into her hotel room, left some messages. But she just got more careful, more determined. She threatened to expose our entire operation, Kozlov added. Said she had enough evidence to bring down the Volkov syndicate from Seattle to Los Angeles. We couldn't let that happen. Jade felt a cold rage building in her chest, but she forced herself to maintain the grieving sister facade. Where is she? Where did you put her body? Bottom of the bay, Vasquez said with clinical detachment. Weighted down good. Fish probably picked her clean weeks ago. The casual brutality of his words hit Jade like a physical blow. She'd known intellectually that Sarah was dead. The evidence had pointed to that conclusion for weeks. But hearing the details spoken aloud by the men responsible made it real in a way that investigation reports never could. So now we have the same problem with you that we had with your sister, Kozlov continued. You know too much to walk away. But I'm not threatening to expose anything, Jade protested, backing against the shipping container as if seeking protection. I just wanted to know what happened. Now that I know, I'll leave. I won't tell anyone. Anton shook his head. You've already documented our operation. taken photos, recorded manifest numbers, identified shipping discrepancies. You think we're going to let you walk away with all that evidence? I'll delete everything, she said desperately. Look, I'll do it right now. She reached for her tablet with trembling hands, but Vasquez grabbed her wrist. Not so fast. We need to make sure you haven't already transmitted anything to outside contacts. I haven't, I swear. I was working alone, just like Sarah. Sarah wasn't working alone, Kozlov said quietly. We found encrypted communications on her laptop. She was feeding information to federal authorities, probably hoping for witness protection in exchange for testimony. The revelation confirmed Jade's suspicions about her sister's investigation. Sarah hadn't been conducting a rogue operation. She'd been working as an informant for a larger federal investigation, which meant her death had been the murder of a federal witness, a crime that carried the death penalty. We're going to take a little trip, Anton announced, gesturing toward a black SUV parked near the container yard's exit. Somewhere more private where we can discuss exactly what you've discovered and who you might have shared it with. Jade recognized the euphemism. They weren't planning a conversation. They were planning an interrogation followed by execution. Once they had her in an isolated location, they'd extract whatever information they could and then dispose of her the same way they'd disposed of Sarah. Please, she whispered, allowing real terror to show in her eyes. I won't tell anyone. I just want to go home. Unfortunately, Kozlov replied, that's not going to be possible. As the three men began to close in around her, Jade made a final assessment of her tactical situation. 3 armed opponents, limited mobility, no backup, no communication with outside support. By every rational calculation, she was about to join her sister at the bottom of Crimson Bay, but as Anton reached for her arm to escort her to the vehicle, Jade allowed herself a small, cold smile. They thought they had her cornered. They had no idea that she'd been hoping for exactly this opportunity since the moment she'd learned of Sarah's death. The black SUV's engine purred quietly in the night air as Anton opened the rear door, gesturing for Jade to get inside with the casual authority of someone accustomed to compliance. The vehicle was positioned strategically, windows tinted dark enough to obscure any activity inside. Parked in the shadows between 2 shipping containers where the overhead security lights created a blind spot. After you, Miss Reeves, Anton said, his politeness carrying the unmistakable edge of a threat. Or should I say, Miss Insurance Investigator? Jade hesitated at the vehicle's threshold, her hands trembling as she gripped her tablet and portfolio. Every instinct screamed against getting into that SUV, but she needed them to believe she was just a terrified civilian who'd stumbled into something far beyond her understanding. Where are you taking me? She asked, her voice cracking with what sounded like genuine fear. Somewhere we can have a private conversation, Kozlov replied, sliding into the driver's seat. Don't worry, if you cooperate fully, answer all our questions honestly, we might find a way to resolve this situation without permanent consequences. The lie was delivered with practiced smoothness, but Jade could see the truth in Vasquez's eyes as he positioned himself in the front passenger seat. These men had no intention of letting her leave alive. She was a liability that had to be eliminated, just like her sister Dot as the SUV pulled away from the dock area. Jade studied her captor's positioning and behavior. Anton sat beside her in the back seat, close enough to grab her if she tried anything, but relaxed enough to suggest he didn't consider her a serious threat. His weapon was holstered, but easily accessible. Vasquez kept glancing back at her, his military training evident in the way he monitored potential threats. Kozlov drove with the confidence of someone who knew these roads intimately. They were professionals, experienced in handling situations like this. But they were also overconfident, secure in their numerical advantage and superior firepower. More importantly, they still believed she was exactly what she appeared to be, a desperate amateur who'd gotten in over her head, The route took them away from the industrial waterfront, toward the hills overlooking Crimson Bay. Jade recognized the area from her preliminary reconnaissance, isolated warehouse districts and abandoned industrial facilities. The kind of places where screams wouldn't be heard and bodies could be disposed of without discovery. "Tell me about your sister's investigation," Vasquez said, turning in his seat to face her. What exactly did she think she'd found? Jade clutched her tablet tighter, the gesture of someone protecting their only leverage. She'd been tracking shipping irregularities for months. Weight discrepancies, manifest inconsistencies, containers that disappeared from port records after arriving. "How did she identify our operation specifically?" Kozlov asked, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. She noticed a pattern in the Tuesday night shipments. Same time schedule, same weight discrepancies, same shipping routes from Russian ports. She thought you were smuggling something valuable enough to justify the security measures. Anton leaned forward slightly. Did she know what kind of cargo we were moving? She suspected weapons, Jade admitted, allowing her voice to drop to a whisper. Military-grade equipment being sold to domestic buyers. She had documentation suggesting the containers listed as agricultural equipment actually contained firearms and ammunition. The three men exchanged glances that confirmed her sister's suspicions had been accurate. Sarah had been close to exposing a major arms trafficking operation, close enough to pose a genuine threat to their entire network. What evidence did she have? Vasquez pressed. Documentation, photos, witness testimony, files on her laptop, shipping manifests, customs records, photographs of container markings, financial records showing payment transfers that didn't match the declared cargo values. Jade paused, then added quietly, she was building a case to present to federal authorities. "We found her laptop," Kozlov said. "Destroyed it completely, along with her hotel room files and everything in her car." "But she was smart," Jade continued, playing her role perfectly. "She kept backup copies hidden. That's how I knew to come here, how I knew what questions to ask." The SUV slowed as they approached a chain-link gate marked with no trespassing signs and warning notices about private property. Beyond the fence, Jade could see the dark silhouettes of abandoned warehouses, their windows broken and walls scarred with graffiti. Anton got out to unlock the gate, then returned as Kozlov drove through into the empty industrial complex. "Where are these backup files now?" Vasquez asked as they parked beside a warehouse that looked like it had been abandoned for years. "Safe deposit box in Portland," Jade replied, "along with instructions to turn everything over to the FBI if anything happened to me." Anton laughed harshly. "You expect us to believe you were that well prepared? An insurance investigator with no law enforcement training? My sister taught me to be careful. She said if she ever disappeared, someone would need to continue her work." Jade met his eyes steadily. She was right. Kozlov shut off the engine, plunging them into darkness broken only by distant streetlights. "Then we have a problem. If those files exist, if they contain evidence that could expose our operation, we need to retrieve them before they surface. The safe deposit box requires both a key and a biometric scan," Jade said. "Even if you kill me, you can't access the contents." "Perhaps," Vasquez replied. "But dead people don't talk to federal agents. And eventually, those files will be forgotten in some bank vault." As they prepared to exit the vehicle, Jade made a final assessment of her situation. Isolated location, 3 armed opponents, no immediate backup or communication with outside support. By every tactical calculation, she was about to become another casualty in the Volkov Syndicate's war against federal investigation. But as Anton opened her door and gestured for her to step out into the night air, Jade felt a familiar calm settle over her mind. The same focused clarity that had carried her through firefights in Somalia, hostage rescues in Afghanistan, and covert operations in Syria. They thought they were taking her to an execution. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. The abandoned warehouse loomed before them like a concrete tomb, its loading dock doors hanging open like broken jaws. Kozlov produced a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness to reveal rusted machinery, scattered debris, and stains on the concrete floor that could have been oil or something far worse. "Inside," Anton ordered, pressing the barrel of his pistol against Jade's spine. "Time for that private conversation we promised." As they walked toward the warehouse entrance, Jade allowed herself one final moment of apparent vulnerability. Tomorrow morning, when dock workers arrived for their shifts, they would find 3 bodies in this abandoned facility. But only one of them would be the grieving sister, who'd come to Crimson Bay, seeking answers about her murdered sibling. The other 2 would be learning why you should never underestimate someone who has nothing left to lose. The warehouse interior reeked of rust, motor oil, and something organic that had been decomposing for months. Kozlov's flashlight beam swept across the cavernous space, illuminating abandoned machinery covered in graffiti, scattered bottles that reflected light like broken stars, and drag marks in the dust that suggested this place had hosted similar conversations before. Jade stumbled slightly as Anton pushed her forward, playing up her civilian vulnerability while her eyes adapted to the darkness. The warehouse was larger than it appeared from outside, roughly 60 by 40 meters, with a mezzanine level accessible by a rusted metal staircase. Multiple exit points including the main loading dock, a side personnel door, and what looked like roof access. Good sight lines, but also multiple blind spots where someone could take cover. "Sit," Vasquez ordered, gesturing toward a metal folding chair that had been positioned in the center of the space. "Hands where we can see them." She complied, setting her tablet and portfolio on the concrete floor beside the chair. The positioning was deliberate. They'd placed her in the most exposed area of the warehouse, with clear fields of fire from multiple angles. Professional setup for an interrogation that was designed to end with disposal of evidence. Kozlov positioned himself directly in front of her, his pistol held casually but ready. Vasquez moved to her left, maintaining distance but keeping her in his peripheral vision. Anton circled behind her, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. "Let's start with the basics," Kozlov said, his voice carrying easily in the warehouse acoustics. "These backup files your sister created, where exactly are they located?" "I told you. Safe deposit box at First National Bank in Portland." Jade's voice trembled appropriately. "Box number 847. I have the key, but the biometric scanner requires my fingerprint." "Very convenient," Anton commented from behind her. "And what happens if you don't access the box within a certain time frame?" Jade hesitated, as if reluctant to reveal her insurance policy. "There's an automated system. If I don't check in every 72 hours using a specific code, the contents get transmitted electronically to a list of federal contacts." Vasquez laughed harshly. "You really expect us to believe an insurance investigator set up that kind of sophisticated dead man switch?" "My sister was paranoid," Jade replied. "She taught me things. Said people like you would kill anyone who threatened your operation." "Smart woman," Kozlov acknowledged. "Too bad she wasn't smart enough to stay away." The casual admission hit Jade like a physical blow, but she forced herself to maintain her frightened civilian act. "What did you do to her?" "I need to know." "You need to focus on your own situation," Anton said, moving to where she could see him. "Because right now you have bigger problems than your dead sister." Kozlov crouched down in front of her chair, bringing his face level with hers. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give us detailed information about these backup files. Location, access procedures, dead man switch protocols, everything. Then you're going to help us retrieve them. And if I refuse, then we spend some time exploring how much pain you can endure before you change your mind." His smile was cold and professional. Luis here has extensive experience in enhanced interrogation techniques. Military training from some very unpleasant places. Vasquez stepped into the light, and Jade could see the truth of Kozlov's words in his eyes. This man had hurt people before, systematically and without remorse. Whatever had happened to him during his military service had left him comfortable with inflicting suffering. "I'll cooperate," Jade said quickly. "I don't want to die like Sarah." "Good," Kozlov replied, standing up. "Let's start with the bank procedures. How do we access the safe deposit box?" "You need my key and my fingerprint. The biometric scanner won't accept anything else. No photographs, no severed fingers, nothing. The bank's security system is too sophisticated. So we keep you alive until we retrieve the files," Anton said. "Then what happens to the dead man's switch?" "I have to input a 16-digit alphanumeric code every 72 hours. Miss the deadline, and everything gets transmitted automatically." Vasquez moved closer, studying her face for signs of deception. "When's your next check-in deadline?" Jade glanced at her watch, a gesture of genuine anxiety. "Tomorrow night, 11:47 p.m. 26 hours, Kozlov calculated. Tight timeline, but manageable. He looked at his associates. "We drive to Portland tonight, retrieve the files tomorrow morning. Eliminate the dead man's switch, then clean up loose ends." The casual way he discussed her murder sent a chill through Jade's performance. But she maintained her terrified civilian facade. "What about my job?" "People will notice if I don't show up to work." "You're taking some personal time to deal with family matters," Anton replied. "Grief makes people do unpredictable things. Sometimes they just disappear." As the three men discussed logistics, Jade used the opportunity to study their positioning and behavior more carefully. Kozlov was clearly the leader, but he deferred to Vasquez on tactical matters. Anton seemed to be muscle, competent, but not particularly creative. They were confident in their plan, but that confidence was making them careless. More importantly, they still didn't suspect her true identity or capabilities. To them, she remained a grieving amateur who'd gotten lucky with her investigation, but was now completely at their mercy. "There's one more thing," Jade said, interrupting their planning session. "About my sister's investigation. What about it?" Kozlov asked. She wasn't working alone. She had a contact inside the federal government, someone who was helping her build the case. Jade let her voice drop to a whisper. That's how she knew to look for the Russian shipping connections. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sound of traffic and the creaking of metal in the wind. The three men stared at her with expressions that had shifted from confident control to genuine concern. "What kind of contact?" Vasquez demanded. "I don't know exactly. She called him Phoenix in her encrypted messages. Said he had access to classified shipping data and customs intelligence." Jade paused, then delivered the line she'd been saving. "She said if anything happened to her, Phoenix would make sure the people responsible paid for it." The lie was carefully crafted to exploit their paranoia. Criminals like the Volkov syndicate lived in constant fear of federal infiltration, of the possibility that their operations had been compromised by informants or undercover agents. "You're saying there's a federal agent with access to your sister's evidence?" Anton asked, his earlier confidence evaporating. "I'm saying someone in the government knows about this operation and has been gathering evidence for months." Jade met each of their eyes in turn. "Killing me won't make that go away." Kozlov's grip tightened on his pistol. "Then we have an even bigger problem than we thought." As the reality of their situation sank in, Jade could see the shift in their body language. They were no longer dealing with a simple cleanup operation. They were potentially facing exposure of their entire network by federal authorities, who might already have enough evidence to bring down the Volkov syndicate. What they didn't realize was that the federal agent they feared was sitting right in front of them. And she'd been waiting 3 weeks for exactly this opportunity. To avenge her sister's murder, the game was about to change completely. The mention of a federal contact had shifted the entire dynamic in the warehouse. Kozlov began pacing, his flashlight beam cutting erratic patterns across the concrete walls as his mind processed the implications. Vasquez had moved to the broken windows, scanning the darkness outside for any sign of surveillance or backup that might be closing in. Anton stood frozen, his weapon trained on Jade but his confidence visibly shaken. "You're telling us your sister was feeding information to an active federal investigation?" Kozlov demanded, stopping his pacing to stare at her. "For how long?" Jade maintained her terrified civilian posture while internally calculating distances and angles. "I think for months. Maybe longer." She had encrypted files going back to last spring, communications with someone who had access to shipping data she couldn't have gotten through normal channels. "What kind of shipping data?" Vasquez asked from his position near the windows. "Container tracking information from ports all along the West Coast. Real-time cargo manifests. Customs inspection schedules." Jade let her voice shake appropriately. "Stuff that would let someone predict exactly when and where illegal shipments were moving." The 3 men exchanged looks that confirmed her assessment. This federal contact, if he existed, would represent an existential threat to their entire operation. The Volkov syndicate had survived for years by staying ahead of law enforcement, by knowing when to lay low and when to move cargo. An inside source feeding information to federal investigators could unravel everything. "Show us these encrypted files," Anton ordered. "They're not on my tablet," Jade replied quickly. "Too dangerous to carry around. Everything's in the safe deposit box with the other evidence." "Convenient," Vasquez said, but his tone suggested he believed her. "Along with your sister's backup files and this mysterious dead man switch." Kozlov resumed his pacing, the beam of his flashlight creating a hypnotic pattern. "If there's really a federal agent with ongoing access to our operational data, killing this woman won't solve our problem. We need to identify the leak and eliminate it." "How?" Anton asked. "We don't even know what agency this contact works for." "We start with what we know," Vasquez replied, his military training evident in this systematic approach. "The sister had access to classified shipping data. That narrows it down to Customs, Coast Guard, maybe D or ATF if they're running a joint operation. Or it could be someone in Port Authority," Kozlov added. "Someone with administrative access to the computer systems." As they debated possibilities, Jade allowed herself a small, internal smile. She'd successfully redirected their attention from immediate execution to paranoid speculation about federal infiltration. But more importantly, their conversation was revealing details about their operation that she'd been trying to uncover for weeks. "There's something else," she said, interrupting their discussion. "About Phoenix." All 3 men turned to look at her. "What about him?" Kozlov asked. "My sister thought he might be military. Naval intelligence, maybe. He knew things about shipping routes and cargo security that went beyond normal customs operations." Jade paused, appearing to gather courage. She said he'd been tracking the Volkov syndicate for over a year. The name hit them like a physical blow. Anton actually stepped backward, his weapon wavering. Vasquez cursed in Spanish. Kozlov's face went pale in the flashlight beam. "How does an insurance investigator know that name?" Vasquez demanded. "My sister's files," Jade replied. She'd identified the organization behind the weapons trafficking. Russian syndicate with operations in 6 countries. She had financial records, communication intercepts, even photographs of key personnel. "Impossible," Anton said, but his voice lacked conviction. "That level of intelligence requires federal resources." "Which is why she had federal help," Jade pressed. "Phoenix wasn't just giving her shipping data. He was sharing classified intelligence about the entire Volkov network. Kozlov stopped pacing, his mind clearly racing through implications. If federal authorities have that level of intelligence about our operations, then they're probably already building cases against everyone in the network, Vasquez finished. From the street-level operators all the way up to Moscow. The warehouse fell silent as the three men contemplated the possibility that their entire criminal empire was under active federal investigation. Jade could see the fear in their eyes, the sudden realization that they might not be the predators in this situation after all. "We need to contact Moscow," Anton said finally. "Report the security breach, get instructions on how to proceed, and tell them what?" Kozlov asked. "That we've possibly been under surveillance for months? That a federal agent has access to our operational data? That we might have compromised the entire network by eliminating a federal informant?" "We had no choice," Vasquez protested. "The sister was going to expose everything. But if she was working with federal authorities, they already know everything," Jade said, playing her role perfectly. "Killing her just confirmed that you had something to hide." The truth of her statement hung in the air like toxic smoke. By murdering Sarah, they had essentially confessed to guilt in the eyes of any federal investigation. They'd escalated from smuggling charges to homicide of a federal witness, a crime that carried the death penalty. "Moscow is going to be very unhappy about this development," Kozlov said quietly. "Moscow is going to want someone to blame," Anton replied. And Jade could hear the fear in his voice. The Volkov syndicate was not known for tolerating failures, especially ones that threatened the entire organization. As the three men continued their increasingly panicked discussion, Jade began to implement the next phase of her plan. Slowly, carefully, she shifted her position in the chair, angling herself to have better access to the tactical knife concealed in her boot. The movement was minimal, disguised as the fidgeting of a terrified civilian. "There might be a way to fix this," she said, interrupting their argument. "What do you mean?" Kozlov asked. "Phoenix. If I can contact him, if I can convince him that I'm not a threat, maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement." Vasquez laughed harshly. "You think you can negotiate with a federal agent?" "I think he might be willing to protect me in exchange for information about my sister's murder," Jade replied. "Federal authorities care more about building cases than they do about individual crimes. If I can give them what they need to prosecute the people responsible for Sarah's death." "You're talking about betraying us," Anton said, raising his weapon. "I'm talking about survival," Jade shot back. "Mine and yours. Because if Phoenix really has been gathering intelligence on your operation for months, you're all dead men already. The only question is whether you die in federal prison or at the bottom of Crimson Bay when Moscow decides you've become a liability." The warehouse fell silent as they processed her words. Outside, the sound of a helicopter passed overhead, probably just routine police patrol, but all four of them tensed at the noise. "How do we contact this Phoenix?" Kozlov asked finally. "Encrypted email," Jade replied. "But I need access to a secure computer system, not just my tablet. And you'd be willing to arrange a meeting?" Jade nodded slowly, the gesture of someone making a desperate bargain with dangerous people. "If it means staying alive long enough to find out what happened to my sister." "What?" They didn't realize was that the meeting she was proposing would be the last appointment any of them would ever keep. The abandoned warehouse office on the mezzanine level hadn't been used in years, but it still contained the essential infrastructure Jade needed for her deception. An old desktop computer sat beneath a layer of dust on a metal desk, connected to power lines that somehow still functioned. Vasquez had managed to establish an internet connection through a mobile hotspot, creating the secure communication channel that Kozlov believed would allow them to contact the mysterious federal agent known as Phoenix. "Remember," Kozlov said, standing behind Jade's chair with his pistol visible, One wrong move, one attempt to send a distress signal. And this ends very badly for you. Jade nodded, her fingers trembling appropriately as she accessed an encrypted email service through a browser that couldn't be traced back to any of them. The account she logged into was one she'd created weeks ago as part of her operational planning, a digital identity that would support her cover story while providing exactly the kind of communication channel her captors expected. What's the email address? Anton asked, positioning himself where he could see the computer screen. Phoenix uses rotating addresses, Jade replied, typing carefully. The current one is embedded in a coded message system that changes every 48 hours. My sister taught me the protocol before she disappeared. The truth was that she was creating the entire communication thread in real time, crafting messages that would convince three paranoid criminals that they were witnessing genuine federal intelligence correspondence. Years of covert operations had taught her that the best deceptions were built on layers of verifiable detail, mixed with carefully constructed fiction. She began typing. Phoenix, emergency situation. Target acquired by hostile elements. Require immediate extraction support. Current location, 47.6062N. 122.3321W. Multiple hostile combatants armed and prepared for extended engagement. Request tactical assessment of federal response options. Jade Kozlov read the message over her shoulder. What are those coordinates? Our current location, Jade replied. Phoenix needs to know where we are if he's going to arrange any kind of meeting or intervention. And you're telling him about us? Vasquez observed suspiciously. I'm telling him that I'm in danger and need help. That's what he'd expect from someone whose sister was murdered for investigating your operation. She sent the message and immediately began crafting a response from the fictional Phoenix account, using techniques she'd learned from psychological operations training to create authentic-sounding federal agent communications. Jade, situation acknowledged. Current intelligence indicates Volkov Syndicate aware of federal investigation. Recommend immediate extraction if possible. Federal task force preparing to move on identified targets within 72 hours. Advise status of evidence packages and deadman protocols. Can arrange emergency protection if you can reach safe extraction point. Phoenix, the response appeared in the inbox within minutes, and Jade let her captors read it before showing any reaction. The message was designed to achieve multiple objectives. Establish Phoenix as a credible federal contact. Confirm their worst fears about ongoing federal surveillance. And create urgency around the timeline they were all facing. 72 hours, Anton said, his voice tight with anxiety. That's not much time. It's enough if we move fast, Kozlov replied. But Jade could see the calculation in his eyes. A federal task force meant multiple agencies, coordinated operations, and evidence packages that went far beyond anything one dead insurance investigator could threaten. Ask him about witness protection, Vasquez suggested. If this woman testifies, what kind of deal would she get? Jade typed the question and crafted another response. Federal witness protection available for cooperation in Volkov prosecution. Evidence regarding Sarah Reeves' homicide would be sufficient for full immunity and relocation. However, cooperation must include identification of all known operatives and financial networks. Federal interest is in prosecuting organization leadership, not individual operators. Time-sensitive offer expires when task force moves. Phoenix, the message hit its target perfectly. All three men could see the opportunity Phoenix was offering: cooperation in exchange for immunity from prosecution. For criminals facing potential death sentences. It was exactly the kind of deal that would seem too good to pass up. He's offering to let us walk away, Anton said, disbelief evident in his voice. In exchange for information about the network, Kozlov corrected. We give them the Volkov leadership, they give us new identities. Moscow would hunt us to the ends of the earth, Vasquez pointed out. Moscow can't hunt dead men, Jade said quietly. If you officially die in federal custody, if your identities are permanently erased, the Volkov Syndicate has no one to hunt. She let them process that possibility while typing another message. Phoenix, hostile elements interested in cooperation arrangement. Request details on protection protocols and evidence requirements. What specific intelligence would Federal Task Force need for full immunity agreements? Time constraints require immediate decision. Jade, the response she crafted was designed to draw them deeper into the negotiation. Cooperation package requires 1. Complete financial records of West Coast operations. 2. Identification and location data for all network personnel. 3. Details of weapon supply chains and distribution networks. 4. Communication protocols with Moscow leadership. 5. Location of evidence related to Sarah Reeves' homicide. In exchange, full immunity, witness protection, new identities, relocation assistance. Meeting can be arranged within 6 hours at neutral location with full federal protection. Decision required immediately. Phoenix Kozlov studied the message carefully. He wants everything. Complete intelligence package on the entire operation. That's what federal agents do, Jade replied. They build comprehensive cases that dismantle entire organizations. Phoenix isn't interested in prosecuting you three. He wants to use your information to destroy the Volkov Syndicate. And if we refuse? Anton asked. Then the task force moves in 72 hours with whatever evidence they already have, and you face federal homicide charges for killing Sarah. Jade met his eyes steadily. Phoenix is offering you a way out, but only if you move fast. Vasquez had been silent throughout the exchange, but now he stepped forward. This could be a trap. How do we know this Phoenix isn't just setting us up for arrest? Because if he wanted to arrest you, he'd already have done it, Jade replied. Federal agents don't negotiate with suspects they plan to prosecute. They negotiate with witnesses they plan to protect. She could see the logic sinking in. From their perspective, the situation had evolved from simple murder cleanup to potential federal cooperation. The mysterious Phoenix was offering them exactly what they needed most, a way to escape both federal prosecution and Volkov retaliation. We need to make a decision, Kozlov said finally. Either we trust this federal agent and try to cut a deal, or we eliminate the witness and hope the task force doesn't have enough evidence to move against us. As the three men debated their options, Jade prepared for the final phase of her operation. They thought they were negotiating with a federal agent who could save their lives. They had no idea. They were planning their own execution. The decision came at 3:17 a.m. After hours of heated debate that had taken the three men through every possible scenario and outcome, Kozlov had finally convinced his associates that cooperation with the federal agent offered their only realistic chance of survival, both from prosecution and from Moscow's inevitable retaliation for compromising the network. We meet with Phoenix, he announced, turning to face Jade at the computer terminal. But we do it on our terms, at a location we control, with guarantees of safe passage. Jade nodded, her fingers already moving across the keyboard to craft the final exchange that would bring her face to face with her sister's killers in circumstances of her choosing. Where do you want the meeting? Pier 12 at the north end of Crimson Bay, Vasquez replied. It's isolated, defensible, and gives us multiple escape routes if this turns out to be a federal ambush. When? She asked. Dawn, 6 a.m. That gives us time to set up properly, but doesn't allow federal authorities to organize extensive surveillance. Kozlov checked his watch. 2 hours and 43 minutes. Jade typed carefully, creating the message that would set the final trap. Phoenix, terms accepted. Meeting location Pier 12, Crimson Bay, 0600 hours. Bring witness protection documentation and immunity agreements. Subjects prepared to provide complete intelligence package on Volkov operations, including evidence of federal witness homicide. Require verification of your authority to negotiate immunity deals before proceeding. Security concerns mandate private meeting. Subjects will not cooperate if federal backup is detected in area. Jade, the response came quickly. Agreed. Will arrive alone with full negotiation authority. Federal backup will maintain distance until cooperation agreements are signed. Bring all evidence materials and complete operational intelligence. This is one-time offer. If meeting is compromised or if subjects attempt deception, immunity deals are void and federal task force moves immediately. See you at dawn. Phoenix, as Jade hit send, she felt a cold satisfaction settle in her chest. Everything was now in motion for the confrontation she'd been planning since the moment she'd learned of Sarah's death. In less than 3 hours, she would have her sister's killers isolated on a dark pier with no backup. No escape routes, and no idea what was about to happen to them. It's done, she said, turning away from the computer. Phoenix will meet us at dawn. Just Phoenix? Anton asked suspiciously. No backup? No federal protection? He can't risk compromising the negotiation, Jade replied. If you see federal agents in the area, you'll assume it's a trap and refuse to cooperate. He needs you relaxed and confident if he's going to get the intelligence information he wants. Kozlov nodded slowly. Smart, but we'll still maintain our own security protocols. Luis, you'll position yourself with overwatch from the warehouse roof across from the pier. Anton, you'll stay mobile in the vehicle, engine running, ready for immediate extraction if anything goes wrong. What about Phoenix himself? Vasquez asked. How do we know he won't just try to arrest us once we start talking? Because he needs your voluntary cooperation to build cases against Moscow leadership, Jade answered. Coerced testimony doesn't hold up in federal court. Phoenix has to keep you happy and cooperative if he wants to use your information against the Volkov syndicate. The logic was sound enough to satisfy their criminal paranoia. Federal agents did indeed prefer voluntary cooperation from witnesses, and immunity deals were standard practice in organized crime prosecutions. From their perspective, Phoenix represented exactly the kind of opportunity that could transform them. From hunted fugitives into protected witnesses, they spent the remaining time preparing for the meeting with methodical precision. Weapons checked and loaded, communication protocols established, escape routes memorized and timed. Jade watched them work with professional admiration. These were experienced criminals who understood operational security and tactical planning. Unfortunately for them, they were planning to meet someone with significantly more advanced training in both areas. As they drove through the pre-dawn darkness toward Pier 12, Jade reviewed her own preparations. The tactical knife in her boot remained undetected. The ceramic blade hidden in her jacket lining had passed their cursory searches. Most importantly, the GPS tracker she'd activated during her first day at Crimson Bay was still broadcasting her location to federal authorities who would investigate when she failed to check in, but she had no intention of relying on backup that might arrive too late. This was personal justice for Sarah, and it required personal action. Pier 12 sat at the northern edge of Crimson Bay's industrial district, a concrete platform extending 200 meters into dark water that reflected the distant lights of the city skyline. Abandoned shipping equipment created shadowy obstacles along the pier's length, while empty cargo containers stacked nearby provided cover for anyone conducting surveillance. Vasquez positioned himself as planned on the warehouse roof with a scoped rifle, while Anton remained in the SUV with the engine running. Kozlov walked beside Jade toward the pier's end, his weapon visible but not yet threatening. Remember, he said quietly, you convince Phoenix to proceed with the immunity deals, or this ends badly for everyone involved. I understand, Jade replied, checking her watch. He should be here any moment. The fog that rolled in from the Pacific created perfect cover for what was about to happen. Visibility dropped to less than 50 meters, turning the pier into an isolated island surrounded by gray nothingness. Even Vasquez's overwatch position would be compromised by the weather conditions. At exactly 6 a.m., footsteps echoed across the concrete platform. A figure emerged from the fog, tall and purposeful, wearing a dark suit that marked him as federal law enforcement. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to authority. "Phoenix," Jade called out, waving in apparent recognition that the figure approached. And Kozlov relaxed slightly as the meeting began exactly as planned. A lone federal agent, apparently unarmed, carrying the documentation they needed for their immunity deals. What Kozlov couldn't see in the fog was that Phoenix bore a striking resemblance to Jade herself. The same height, the same build, the same purposeful movement. Because Phoenix wasn't a federal agent at all. Phoenix was Lieutenant Commander Jade Reeves, using a disguise she'd prepared weeks ago for exactly this scenario. As the figure approached the center of the pier where Kozlov waited with his hostage, Jade smiled grimly. Her sister's killers thought they were about to negotiate their freedom with a corrupt federal agent. They were about to learn what happened when you murdered a Navy SEAL's family. "Good morning, gentlemen," Phoenix called out through the fog. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." The last thing Dmitry Kozlov would ever see was the blade that materialized in Phoenix's hand as the fog swirled around them like a shroud. By sunrise, 3 bodies lay scattered across Pier 12, and Lieutenant Commander Jade Reeves was walking back through the fog toward a future where her sister's murder had finally been avenged. The girl they'd knocked unconscious wasn't unconscious anymore, and she was done pretending to be helpless. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.